Hi everyone, in this video we are going to cover the topic of related persons. Specifically, we are going to be applying the concepts that we find in ITA 251 or section 251. So let's get started by taking a look at the provision. ITA 251 subsection 1. It says, for arm's length for the purposes of this act. Paragraph A says related persons shall be deemed not to deal with each other at arm's length. Now, we might read this and say, okay, that makes sense. If you are related to someone, you are not dealing at arm's length, or it would be a non-arm's length transaction. What might not be obvious to you is that in tax, related persons is actually a defined term. And we can find this definition in the very next subsection. So let's take a look. ITA 251 subsection 2. It states the definition of related persons. For the purpose of this act, related persons or persons related to each other are. And you'll see paragraphs A, B, and C if you were to get your Physical Tax Act and open it up and look at it, which I recommend you do. Let's look at paragraph A. Paragraph A says individuals connected by blood relationship, marriage, or common law partnership or adoption. Okay, that means if you satisfy that criteria, you are considered related or a related person according to tax. Now, marriage, common law partnership, and adoption, that makes sense to most people. In fact, a lot of people would say even blood relationship makes sense to them as well. But again, it might not be obvious, blood relationship is actually a defined term in the Income Tax Act. And you'll find that blood relationships are defined in ITA 251 subsection 6. I'm not going to cover that in much detail at all in this video. That's been covered in your lecture, so you could go there to take a closer look at 251 subsection 6. Continuing on with what we're looking at on this screen, ITA 251 subsection 2. We've covered paragraph A, which is saying related persons include blood relationships, or if they're connected by marriage, or common law partnership or adoption. But there are other paragraphs we need to look at, like paragraph B, for example. Paragraph B is saying a corporation and. So a corporation is related to subparagraph 1, a person who controls the corporation if it is controlled by one person. Hopefully that makes sense. That's talking about a single shareholder corporation. And of course, a single shareholder, they own 100% of the shares, they would be related to their company. Subparagraph 2, a person who is a member of a related group that controls the corporation. An example of this would be if myself, my brother, and my sister, the three of us together, if we happen to control a corporation. We don't, but let's pretend we did. I might not have control on my own, but as a member of that related group, the siblings that we all are, I would then be related to a group that controls the organization or the corporation, and as such, I would be considered related to the corporation. And subparagraph 3, any person related to a person described in subparagraphs 1 or 2. So if you are related to anyone that qualifies in subparagraph 1 or 2 that we just went through, you would be related to that corporation. Then finally, we get to ITA 251, subsection 2, paragraph C, where it starts to consider are two corporations related to one another. And you'll find that there are 6 different subparagraphs with different criteria for you to consider. It's expected that all students in our course will actually navigate to this provision in the Income Tax Act and read each of these themselves to try to get an understanding. The first 3 are relatively straightforward. The last 3 can be a bit more challenging, and I'll cover those with an example later in this video. But before we get to the examples, let's quickly summarize ITA 251, the provisions that we've talked about thus far. 251 subsection 1 basically says that related persons are not at arm's length. 251 subsection 2 is where you go to actually define related persons. Paragraph A is where it mentions blood relationships, marriage, common law partnerships, and adoption. Paragraph B is where it's really comparing a corporation and if it's related to a person. And then paragraph C is where it's really looking at any two corporations to establish if those two corporations are related to one another. And before we move on, don't forget 251 subsection 6 is where blood relationships are defined. This is a great time for you to pause the video, go to 251 subsection 2, paragraph C, and read through the 6 subparagraphs there to see if they all make sense to you. And if they do, the question is, how well do we understand it? Let's look at some examples. A has 2 adult children, C and D. C has 2 children, X and Y. D has 1 child, Z. Now we'll pause here for a moment and just focus on the relationship between the families. A is related to C and D. C and D are the children of A. And if you followed everything in your lecture, you'll know that C and D are siblings and they are related too. So I'll draw a line between them. C has 2 children, X and Y, and they are siblings. So we should draw a line between those two. They are related. And you'll notice I am not drawing a line between X and Z or Y and Z because cousins are not considered related, at least for the purposes of the Income Tax Act. You'll also notice that I'm not drawing any lines between C and Z or D and X and Y. And that's because nieces and nephews, aunts and uncles are not considered to be related persons for the Income Tax Act. Let's keep going with the case. A owns all of the issued and outstanding shares of ACO, and consequently A controls ACO. Each of Y and Z owns 50% of the common shares of OPCO. And the question posed to you, are ACO and OPCO related? This is where you pause the video again, you go to ITA 251, subsection 2, paragraph C. Read through the subparagraphs there and see if you can figure out are ACO and OPCO related according to anything you read there. Pause the video. If you're back, hopefully you identified subparagraph 4, which says if one of the corporations is controlled by one person, and that person is related to each member of an unrelated group that controls the other corporation. Let's walk through that. We've got 2 companies, ACO and OPCO, and we're trying to decide if they are related according to the Income Tax Act. ACO is controlled by one person, A. That satisfies this first part of the criteria. If one of the corporations is controlled by one person, and that person, A, is related to each member of an unrelated group that controls the other corporation. So Y and Z together control OPCO. Even though they are unrelated, they are an unrelated group that has control, and they are both individually related to their grandparent A. So the answer, are ACO and OPCO related? The answer is yes, per ITA 251, subsection 2, paragraph C, subparagraph 4. Let's keep it moving. Case 2. Case 2. A has 2 adult children, C and D. C has 2 children, X and Y. And D has 1 child, Z. Once again, C and D are related, and X and Y are related. They are siblings. Aunts, uncles, nieces, and nephews are not related according to the ITA. Continuing on with this familiar fact pattern, A owns all of the issued and outstanding shares of ACO. Consequently, A controls ACO. Each of Y and Z owns 50% of the common shares of OPCO. And case 2 introduces a new company. A, C, and D each own 1/3 of BCO. are BCO and OPCO related? And once again, I'd like you to go to ITA 251, subsection 2, paragraph C. Read through the 6 subparagraphs there and see if any of them can help answer if BCO, the company here, and OPCO are related. Pause the video and give it a go. If you're back, hopefully you identified subparagraph 5. If any member of a related group that controls one of the corporations is related to each member of an unrelated group that controls the other corporation. Let's explain this. A, C, and D do not have control of BCO on their own, but as a group, they do. And if any one of these members, in this case A, is related to each member of an unrelated group that controls the other corporation, OPCO, the corporations are considered related. So the answer, are BCO and OPCO related, is yes, per ITA 251, subsection 2, paragraph C, subparagraph 5. Let's try a different case. Case 3. Mr. X, Mr. Y, and Mr. Z are an unrelated group that controls XYZ Co. So these are 3 individuals that are not related to one another, but they do control a company. We are not given their individual percentages of ownership. We just know that together they have control. Their spouses, Mrs. X, Mrs. Y, and Mrs. Z, are an unrelated group that controls ZYX Co. And once again, we can see that we are not given their individual percentages, but we know as a group, they have control of ZYX Co. And while Mr. X, Y, and Z are not related to one another, and Mrs. X, Y, and Z are not related to one another, the spouses are related to one another. And now that we've finished the picture, the question is XYZ Co related to ZYX Co? Once again, I'd like you to go to ITA 251, subsection 2, paragraph C. Read through the 6 subparagraphs you find there and see if any of them help answer this question for you. Hopefully you found subparagraph 6, which says if each member of an unrelated group that controls one of the corporations is related to at least one member of an unrelated group that controls the other corporation. Let's walk through that. Let's start from the left here. If each member of an unrelated group, well, here's an unrelated group, Mr. X, Y, and Z. They have control of this company over here, XYZ Company. If each member of this unrelated group is related to at least one member of the other unrelated group that controls the other corporation, then they are related. And that's what we see. Mr. X is related to at least one member of this group here. Same thing with Mr. Y, and same thing with Mr. Z if we're working from left to right. So the answer then to is XYZ Co related to ZYX Co, the answer is yes. I hope you found this video helpful. This is a great question to get you reading the Income Tax Act, thinking about it, and testing your understanding. So until next time, I just want to say thanks for watching and happy studying.